New York Times, protests erupt in Venezuela as nations denounce election results. President Nicolas Maduro's government ejected 7 diplomatic missions from countries that condemned his claim of victory, which he made despite reports of fraud. I would just like to pause for a moment and say, how dare you, foreign nations, question the election integrity of a great country like Venezuela? There's no fraud. That's a conspiracy theory. Come on. You can't just have foreign countries claim fraud means the election was rigged. All right. Well, in 2020, the United States had a very tumultuous period at the end where there was a contested election. Texas sued Pennsylvania with 48 or so states involved in filing amicus briefs in support or opposition. The Supreme Court started crying like little babies saying, oh, we can't answer this, except for Thomas and Alito, who are based and said we must answer the question. But the rest of the court was like, as terrified cowards, we're not going to answer one of the most pressing and important questions. So they threw it out. Insanity. Now you may be saying, Tim, I don't care about Venezuela. And, I'm marginally interested. I've been there. I was forced to flee the country, as it were. But I look at what's going on right now as there's a possibility here. Now, we're very different from Venezuela, but we are seeing riots. We are seeing fires. We are seeing murders. We are seeing posters being torn down, statues being ripped from their bases. And people say, Tim, what happens in November in the United States? And I don't have a good answer, but we can certainly look at Venezuela. When you have an opposition party, when you have years after year after year, just decades of corruption in Venezuela from the socialists. I was in Venezuela 10 years ago during these protests, and it was the wealthier people protesting. I was accused of being CIA, sent to destabilize the revolution, and I fled the country. Good thing I did when I did. They probably would have put me in jail. Venezuela is not the same as the U.S., but we are looking at an election down the line, 97 days, where no one's going to accept the results, no matter what happens. They're going to claim Republicans were suppressing the vote. Republicans will claim Democrats were cheating. It doesn't matter. I do not see a circumstance in which people will respect the outcome because no one will believe it was legitimate. So what happens? Well, let's take a look at Venezuela. Here's Gunther Eagleman posting. I stand with the people of Venezuela as they're tearing down a poster of Maduro. Ali London. Thousands continue to protest across Venezuela over the election results, accusing socialist President Maduro of rigging the results after the opposition was projected to win by a landslide. Let's do this. Instead of pulling up any singular tweet, I'm going to pull up just a general search of Venezuela. And what do we find? Well, this was from an hour ago. I searched for this, so I'll refresh it in a second. One guy says the CIA loves a good statue topple. Currently, their world tour is working in Venezuela. Why does it look so familiar? Ah, yes. The socialists, right? They think that people tearing down statues of a socialist dictator is always going to be the CIA. It often is. Often. Here we go. This guy says, as a reminder, Venezuela used to be twice as wealthy as Chile. Then Chile followed Milton Friedman's ideas while Venezuela was ruled by socialists. Now Chile is the wealthiest large country in South America, and Venezuela the poorest. The difference between capitalism and socialism. Yeah. Wow, look at this. Is this GDP? That's incredible. Brazil, what happened? What year is this? What, for real, is this 1980 to 2023? When I was in Brazil 10 years ago, their GDP was 8 to 9,000. So they have doubled it. Bravo, Brazil. Argentina, they do all right. Take a look at that. 26,000. Chile, 29.9. That's incredible. Really great stuff. And then, of course, Venezuela is still at about 8,000. They used to be one of the wealthiest, and now they're one of the poorest. Sad. Look at that. Venezuela hasn't moved. There's been no growth. Chile was at 3.4, went up 10 times. Venezuela stayed the same. You consider inflation, that means things got substantially worse. Here's a video from Ian Miles Chong's posted a video. A bakery in Venezuela gives all its bread to people protesting against Maduro. What a sight. Venezuela needs more of this. Regional officers, through tears, remove their uniforms and bulletproof vests, refusing to fight against their own people. They join the protesters calling for the fall of tyrant Maduro. Now, many of you may be saying, perhaps, if in November, Kamala Harris loses, or wins, I should say wins, many of you think that you'll end up, or hope, that police are going to be like, no way, we won't support Kamala Harris. They take off their helmets and they say, we don't want this. We're for Trump. The Trump supporters rise up. I got news for you, my friends. It's probably the other way around. The people in these cities, these cops, they're not taking off their vests because they support the protesters. They're doing it because they're outnumbered. That's it. So where does this go? Well, I'll tell you what I think. The people in Venezuela that are protesting, they're in Caracas. They're in the big city. Who lives in big cities? 80% Democrats. You think they're going to go out en masse and protest if Kamala Harris wins? No, they're going to celebrate it. Caracas is very different. Maybe if we get 10 years of rule under Democrat uniparty establishment authority, then people in cities might begin to protest. But I don't see what's happening here happening in the United States. You take a look at these videos, and what I think we'll end up seeing is if Donald Trump wins, in big cities, they will protest, they will claim Trump is a fascist, and police will take off their badges and their vests and put down their weapons, just like these cops do. I do not see anyone from Appalachia driving to D.C. or any blue area for a fight. Makes no sense. Interestingly, you may get conflict in suburban areas where red and blue clash. And unfortunately for me, I am in just such an area. Well, actually, we're slightly outside of it, but Jefferson County in West Virginia is like 60-40 or 55-45 red to blue. You got a lot of DC transplants. That being said, these DC transplants are wealthier, uppity individuals who ain't going to be fighting anybody. So will something like this come to the United States? I don't see it. I don't see it. Here are the latest top posts. Ian Malchong says, X has removed Nicolas Maduro's government official gray checkmark from his profile. He is no longer recognized as the legitimately elected leader of Venezuela. Oof. Holy smokes. Here's someone hitting a statue, I guess. Statue's still being torn down. So a lot of the same stuff. And the latest posts, I can't read the Spanish stuff. We could translate it, but I'm not interested. Oh, look at this. A car. Venezuela Attorney General, breaking news. There's a lot of videos coming out. Let's check this one, get a translation here. From Mass Radio HN, Minister of Defense of Venezuela, Vladimir Padrino, calls on citizens not to fall into provocations that result in violence. Also reports that 23 military officials and 25 police officers are injured and a sergeant murdered by fascist acts. The question will be, my friends, what will the military do? I was in Egypt. And, everybody and their mom knows. I get it. You get it. I was in a bunch of different countries at the start of conflict crisis. I was in Ukraine at the start of the war when it was protests and then it devolved into an escalation of civil conflict. I ended up leaving right before it became right before they ousted the president, Yanukovych. In Egypt, I was there during the Second Revolution. And we decided at one point to flee the country. We thought that we got what we could get and it's time to go. Crazy stuff. I remember we're riding in this big van with a group of people. We got a car following us. They got a bunch of guns. They got AKs and handguns and things like this. I went to Tahrir Square. There was concerns about the violence because there's thousands of young men screaming and protesting. The story I'm told by the locals as we were covering it. The first revolution, 30 years of military rule. Eventually they say, we want democracy. We want elections. So they protest. They oust the military leader. They have elections. The secular individuals, or more lightly Muslim, not fundamentalist, break up into a bunch of different political parties. The Muslim Brotherhood is like, doesn't matter what you believe politically, Muslim. They end up winning around 20+% of the vote, which is the single largest voting bloc. So whoever gets the most votes wins. Unfortunately for the rest of the country, about 80% did not want them. So they rioted again. A year later, you got the second revolution. The military basically says, okay, this is not going to work. The country has a very large Muslim voting bloc, and if we keep doing first past the post elections, which basically means one person, one vote, whoever gets the most votes wins, the Muslim Brotherhood is going to win every time. Solution. The solution proposed by the military was to just massacre Muslim Brotherhood. That'll do it. And so at some point when the APC started rolling in, we decided to GTFO. I remember we were at our hotel at the Hilton, and they raided a bunch of pro-Muslim Brotherhood, pro-Muslim news stations, Al Jazeera, for instance. And I went down to the lobby and talked to some other journalists, and I said, where do you think this ends up? And they said, don't worry, they're only going after journalists that support the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'm like, okay, I can see where this is going. We had gone to Nasser City. I had gone to the Muslim Brotherhood areas and went around and we talked to people. I don't speak Arabic, but I had a fixer with me. And the military decided they would just break these protests up, and anyone who resisted, they would just shoot and kill. So they did. The military decided. They took over. Now, what would happen in the United States? Would anything like that happen? The answer is actually a simple no. What would be required first is for the rural portions of New York to go and set up protest camps and occupy space in and outside of New York City, which I don't see happening. Older conservative folks ain't going to be doing that. But there is a risk of something different. Depending on the policies that are enacted, if confidence in the system breaks, if Kamala Harris ends up winning and there's accusations of mass fraud, and this time it's tenfold or whatever, you may get more rural areas of blue states saying things like, we no vote of no confidence. We do not participate anymore. Truckers may outright be like, I'm not going to drive into those cities. I'm not going to drive into these states, which we already see a lot of, to be honest. That bifurcation could lead to New York saying, we are going, look, if truckers won't bring food into New York City, which is very difficult to do, the city is going to have to intervene to make sure it happens. The people in those cities will revolt against them because they're going to be like, we are hungry. It will not be red versus blue. It will be regular people in New York who are apolitical because most people don't vote, wondering why they can't get food, and they will be rioting. And they will be demanding a political change, not to Republican. They'll be just saying, just get rid of our current leadership. Now, over at the Rolling Stone, they say this. Trump allies sure are talking a lot about civil war. Oh, boy. Let's do a Control F search. Timcast? Tim Pool. No Tim Pool or Timcast? Heavens me. They can't give me one, huh? Well, I guess it's because I'm not going to subscribe to read the full story. Let's see if we can just do that. Yeah, okay. So maybe I am in there. Panicked search terms spike online after Trump rally shooting, Civil War II. You know, we had this conversation with Buzz Patterson the other day, and he said that he thought if Donald Trump were to have been shot, we would be in a civil war. I don't know that I agree. And I'm the guy who's like saying civil war all the time, right? I don't know that I agree. However, I do believe we may be in some kind of escalation of violence. He said maybe insurgency. He said he'd think we'd be shooting. And I think it's clear what he means is that like Americans would be. I don't know that I agree with that. If Donald Trump were to lose his life, why would anyone in Appalachia go to DC? And that's the point. And he said, okay, maybe like nobody in West Virginia would do it. And I'm like, no, but let's be real. Like, why would anybody in northern New York City, or I'm sorry, northern New York, drive to New York City? Why would someone from Atlanta, which is actually probably more liberal, but why would someone from the South go to the North? This is the thing that people don't understand. When the American Civil War happened in 1861, you get these people that are saying things like, Tim Pool's crazy for thinking civil war is possible. Just go outside and talk to people. There's no interest in this. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that in 1861, let's say like February, like right before, this is around the start of the Civil War. Do you think that if someone walked outside of Atlanta, they would walk up to their neighbor and be like, oh, I'm just itching for a civil war. And the other guy would be like, ooh, you Southerner, ooh, you Northerner. And they box? No. The dude in the South would walk out and be like, we're the South. We agree with each other. More to the point, they were states. So they'd be like, we're Virginia, we're Georgia, we're, Arkansas or whatever. And then in the North, do you think if someone in New York City walked outside, they'd bump into a guy who was pro-Confederate? Of course not. It's never how it worked. Regions are politically aligned. In any civil war, you walk outside and everyone agrees. Now, things are still the same here. People in blue areas walk outside and they think everything, look, this is normal. The Republicans are crazy. I talk to my neighbors all day. We agree. And it's like, yeah, why don't you take a drive down to a rural area and talk to the locals there? Here's a story from Rolling Stone. A little more than a week after Donald Trump was nearly assassinated at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania, blah, blah, blah. Ohio State Senator George Lang was warming up a crowd for J.D. Vance when he's steadily, idly vamping up how the country might need a civil war. Might need? What do you say? I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. It's the greatest experiment in the history of mankind, and if we come down to a civil war, I'm glad we got people like Bikers for Trump on our side. I think that is deeply irresponsible, and it is not the case. The far left wants civil war. We don't. Any sane person would tell you that breaks the system. But I'm not surprised to hear people saying this. I have been warning the track we are on leads in one direction with no off-ramp. There are variables I can't see, so hopefully there is a switch ahead that pulls us out of this. But can I, it's just absolutely fascinating. I'm going to say this. Anyone who thinks it is not possible to have a civil war is a moron. I will be as crass and as insulting as possible. A moron. That's just it. Now, you go back to 2018 when there was that Atlantic article, whatever magazine it was, I talk about it all the time, and they said there was a 30 to 90% chance of civil war. And if you said, oh, shut up, I'd agree with you. I'd be like, yeah, I mean, it's just one article. I thought we were on that track back then. Where we are today, with January 6th, 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, with the contested election, and what we're seeing now, unprecedented historical moments, and someone tried to kill Donald Trump. And people are still going to be like, nah, it'll never happen. Nah. How insane is that? I should bring Andrew Wilson back and ask him what he thinks again. We ended up extending the Culture War show by an hour after we started debating Civil War because he was, with all due respect, taking a generic line typically applied by leftists to say, Tim Pool predicted a civil war. It didn't happen. I have never predicted a civil war. I have never said on this date at this time a civil war will happen. I said, I don't know. I say we are on track. But here's an important factor. It could be 30 years. It could be 20 years. It could be 10 years. It could be 5 years. I honestly don't know. In 1820, they were talking about civil war over slavery. And they put a band-aid on things and tried to keep it constrained. And it didn't work. It took 40 years until everything broke. It's 2024. We could be in a similar period. And I could be wrong that we are looking at something more immediate. However, that being said, with everything we're seeing now, you go back to 2017. And that's the bike lock Berkeley battle, street battles and conflict. And I said, this stuff is bubbling up like crazy. I remember watching a video where thousands, literal 2,000-3,000 people are out protesting, beating the crap out of Trump supporters. And I'm like, this is getting into Civil War level stuff. And I had people telling me Tim, you're nuts. It's just street violence. And it's this is unprecedented. And if this track keeps continuing, it will reach the highest levels. We had a group chat with journalists based out of D.C. One conservative guy is like, oh, shut up, Tim. The security state would never allow the government to crumble. Fascinating. Look where we are now. The security state is in shambles. The deep state is in shambles. People are fighting in the streets still. The worst riots the country's ever seen since the 50s in 2020. The president forced into an emergency bunker with 100 plus officers injured. The White House grounds were firebombed. St. John's Church was set on fire. Unprecedented. Less than a year later, January 6th. Now, I don't think January 6th was the apocalypse, but it certainly was unprecedented. A riot at the Capitol, storming in. I know half the people on the other side of the building didn't storm in, but on the one side, they did. I don't think it's the apocalypse. But all of these things are indicative of the direction we're going. Now you have January 6 defendants who have never been charged still in prison, political prisoners. You have the criminal charges against Donald Trump. You have the altering of the law to charge Donald Trump. The hush money case in New York is one of the first times, or I should say the highest profile moment. So I'm sure there's corruption all across the board, where they charged Donald Trump without due process. They said, quote, another crime. That's what Trump was charged with. Falsification of business records, citing another crime. You can't just do that. But you see where we're at. Why would anyone believe that with everything they've done to Trump, changing the laws so he could be sued, lying about his businesses to claim he committed fraud, when his lender said, no, he did a great job and we weren't defrauded? Don't care. They said, don't care. Criminally charging Trump without due process, citing another crime that's never been adjudicated, and we still don't know what it was. And then when all of that fails, he's nearly shot in the face. Okay, dude. If someone shooting Trump in the ear, nearly killing him, isn't enough for you to consider that this country is in such political tumult that we have the possibility of civil war, then nothing will. Nothing will. You'd think January 6th would be enough to consider that this country could disassociate, break apart, or result and break down into insurgent fighting. But I think people live in the movies where they think it's going to be like California declaring war on Texas or something. They live in movie reality. Well, real reality is they don't fall out. The wars don't happen this way. And a civil war doesn't happen this way. I think we're looking at potentially more like a dissociative Soviet Union style breakdown, which will result in resource conflict. Civil war would likely be more regional than anything, and likely with insurgent violence. They're going to say Lang later wrote that he regretted the remark, which was made in excitement of the moment on stage. His own pangs of conscience aside, Lang's comments aren't an isolated occurrence. Trump and his allies have been musing about political violence and the possibility of civil war for years, even as expert warns that Americans' increasing political polarization puts the country at risk of such scenarios. Only a few weeks before Lang's onstage comments, footage emerged of Shelby Bush, chair of Arizona's delegation of the Republican National Convention, threatening to lynch an official in charge of elections in Maricopa County, Arizona's most populous county. Quote, if Stephen Richer walked in this room, I would lynch him, Bush said in a video that Richer, who is himself a Republican, posted online. I don't unify with people who don't believe the principles we believe in and in the American cause that founded this country. Steve Bannon, a longtime advisor, repeatedly invoked the prospect of war in June while addressing a Turning Point Action convention to young conservative activists. Are we at war, he asked? Is this a political war to the knife? According to CNN, this strange, oddly specific phrase is associated with the Bleeding Kansas skirmishes in the years before the Civil War. We are in civil strife. Academics agree. Authors, former CIA. Civil strife doesn't always lead to civil war. But we are in civil strife and have been for years. Probably around the time that Aaron Danielson was shot in the chest in Portland and the Chaz, like the far left, seized territory in cities and set up autonomous zones and killed people, murdered people, burned down buildings, seized a police station, burned down a police station. This is civil strife. It's possible it doesn't lead to civil war, but we're in the period that can either go civil war or calm back down. They're going to mention Mark Robertson. They say the list goes on. Last year, Georgia State Senator Colton Moore floated the possibility of civil war in an interview with Bannon's podcast, War Room. We need to be taking action right now because if we don't, our constituencies are going to be fighting in the streets. I don't want a civil war. I don't want to have to draw my rifle. I want to make this problem go away with my legislative means to doing so. I think that's a great comment. We don't want to fight. And for all the people that are inching towards it, you will regret it. Mark my words. When your bread costs $20 and you're lucky to get it, your store shelves have nothing but salt and flour, and you're wondering if, do I eat the whole stick of butter? It's the only food I have left for the day. My calories are coming from pure fat. And the worst is not just that you don't have food, especially in the suburbs. It's that when you wake up and you hear gunshots going off and you don't know who's shooting at who or why. What do? Hide in your basement? You do not want this. And anybody claiming they do is nuts. Cadence Taylor, Republican who ran for governor in Georgia, invoked civil war when reacting to Donald Trump's indictment over his efforts to overturn the election there. This is treason. This is war. I hope and pray it gets resolved before we use guns. I really do. I do not want to see bloodshed in America, but we're at war right now, a war for our freedom. Asked by Tucker Carlson about the possibility of civil war might break out a little less than a year ago, Trump himself spoke warmly of January 6th, the day his supporters violently stormed the Capitol, calling it the most beautiful day some of his supporters have ever experienced. Pressed directly about the potential for open conflict, Trump demurred, I don't know. Because I don't know what, I can say this. There's a level of passion I've never seen. There's a level of hatred I've never seen. That's probably a bad combination. We take a look at what's going on in Venezuela, and I think you can see how it could possibly happen. If this election is contested, and it will be, no question. It's already being contested. Missouri suing New York. It's begun. 97 days out. If it gets worse, you may see something like Venezuela. I think we're more likely to see protests. If Trump wins, the left will lose their minds and they'll burn down cities. I think protests are very likely. And imagine this scenario. Donald Trump wins. The far left loses their minds and begins destroying and burning down cities. Every major city is dealing with Summer of Love times 10. Military then says, this country will fall apart unless we remove Donald Trump and his supporters. And you say, but they won. But they're the voting bloc. Doesn't matter. Because the far, like in Egypt, they'll say the violent faction is making it impossible. So it's not about whether Donald Trump has a right to rule. It's about if he is in charge, will the country cease to exist? And the question is, what does the military do? We're not like Egypt. Many military might say no. But then what? Do you get fractional factioning? No idea. I think dissociation makes the most sense. But with dissociation, so this means like Arizona stops abiding by federal law pertaining to certain water restrictions. California does. People just start saying, okay, I'm done playing by the rules. There aren't any. I think then the risk of civil war is actually resource conflict. Because, I'm sorry, Vegas ain't got nothing. And people are, it's just the stupid, people are like, Vegas is luxury. What do you mean? People want to go and relax and gamble. And I'm like, nah, dude. Without federal laws, these liberal states are going to open the doors to whatever. And with a breakdown of law and order, people are going to do whatever. Underground casinos will pop up. You don't need Vegas. And Vegas is the desert. Look, man. From the post-millennial. 3 men sentenced for plans to strike power grid in Northwest U.S. Suspected neo-Nazi paramilitaries. Doesn't matter what you think or want. The rogue elements are at play, and that's terrifying. When you have such dramatic hyperpolarization, it becomes harder and harder for any kind of authority to hold things together. So how does it go down? I don't know. I think there's a possibility Kamala wins through less than political means, and the Republicans just grumble. Middle American red areas dissociate to some degree. Maybe they stop paying taxes. Then enforcement becomes more and more difficult. You'll get insurgent clashes with federal authorities, but it'll take years. Bleeding Kansas style conflict. If Trump wins, I think it's more quick and immediate. Trump may then invoke the Insurrection Act, gain control of the cities. Either way. That's when we go into hot conflict. So I hope not. But I'll leave this, I'll wrap this segment up here. Smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends, become a member at timcast.com. Next segment will be coming up at 4 p.m. But for those watching live, we'll go to Super Chats right now. And thank you all for hanging out.